Hey everyone, welcome to the SOUNDMIND podcast, where we dive into the fascinating world of music psychology. I'm your host, Sophia, and as a music psychologist, I'll be guiding you through everything you've ever wondered about music. So, whether you're a music lover or just interested in the science of sound, you're in the right place. Now, music today is no longer just something that we listen to. It's something that we stream, share, collect, monetize, build communities around, and build identities through as well. But as technology continues to reshape the music industry, it also raises bigger questions about creativity, connection, fandom, and what we actually want from music in this digital age. So I'm so excited to introduce today's guest, Josh Simmons. He's the CEO of Vinyl Group, which is Australia's only publicly listed music company, and the founder of Vampr, often described as the LinkedIn for musicians and creatives. Before moving into tech and entrepreneurship, Josh was a musician himself, fronting the indie rock band Buchanan, running a record label and a publishing company, touring with artists like Coldplay and Keith Urban, and collaborating across the music industry as a songwriter and producer. Through companies like Vampr, Vinyl.com, and Serenade, Josh is helping shape the future of how artists connect, how fans experience music, and how creativity is sustained in this increasingly digital world. So today we're discussing collaboration and identity to fandom, ownership, creativity, and what music might feel like in the future. So, hi Josh, welcome to the SOUNDMIND. So amazing to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, I think it's so awesome to be able to just connect with people all over the world. You're down under in Melbourne
I
and
am.
I'm in Stockholm, which is a huge gap between us, but so great to be able to have you on the podcast today. So let's kind of jump straight into it. Maybe let's start out with your journey, because you've had a really interesting kind of roller coaster of a journey, I would say. And it would be great to kind of outline where you kind of started out and get to kind of where you are today. You started out as a musician, right?
Yeah, well, sort of. I really started more in film, actually. When I left school, I started a film production business, and we made we made a short film and a feature film that, we did their thing, and then that was my first sort of taste of business and mixing creativity with business as well. But I was probably, in hindsight, a little too young for to take on something of that ambition. So I went and actually did manual labor for a couple of years, which are some of the best years of my life. And sort of, I suppose, after doing that for a couple of years, I did start to get that itch again to want to explore my creativity, and that's it is for creative folks, it is an itch that just doesn't resolve unless you're doing something along those lines. And so for me, that meant managing bands for a minute, but the bands I were managing weren't making the music I wanted to hear. So I said, screw this, I'm going to start my own project. And so that's how I got into music. And so by that stage, I would have been about 2021, I think, when the band started. And that all went very quickly. Like I look back at that and can't believe how much happened in quite a short amount of time. Like we put a song out, and then I think, within a year, we'd signed record deals, we'd toured the country, we'd played festivals and done all that exciting stuff that young bands get to do. So that was like, baptism by fire. And then there's a bit of drama, all the usual stuff, bands breaking up and deals not working out. And so there was almost a little bit of clichéness to what happened next. A lot of the pitfalls that, for all the best intentions in the world, you try to avoid, but there's a reason why they're cliches. And despite all of that, we still sort of had this really interesting career where we never really fully broke through, but typically went from one high to another and really did end up playing some really quite large shows and appearing in some pretty big charts around the world. And then I started to get this other itch, which is what took me down the path I'm on now, which is more music tech and working more on the business side of things, where I really I felt that I could probably provide more to an industry that I deeply loved, by solving some of the problems that I experienced firsthand as an artist, rather than continuing to make indie pop songs.
Yeah, that's amazing. I guess like when you were a musician, I think a lot about, being a musician, and there's a lot of research around kind of music and identity formation, especially in kind of young adulthood. And music kind of becomes this like mirror for who we are or who we want to become. And what would you say about that kind of stage of your life? How much of your identity was tied to being a musician before you kind of pivoted?
Well, that's a great question, because I never loved the identity of I'm a muso. So I would almost tell everyone I was everything but. I would say I'm a tradie, or I'm a this, or I'm a that. I didn't never was super comfortable with the label of I'm just a musician. And that could be probably a tall poppy syndrome thing here in Australia, where or it maybe it's more of a classist thing. I don't know, but I went to sort of a school that was slightly expensive, and I think people looked down on that and thought it wasn't real job. And in fact, I always forget this these days. I should remind myself, but that was one of the reasons why I wanted to get into the business side. Was one of the earliest ambitions for this platform I made called Vampr was I wanted kids who were like 16, getting ready to go into a careers counselor's office for the first time, to be able to say, hand on heart, when I grow up, I want to be a musician, and not to be laughed at. And I thought, bringing tangible solutions to people so that they can go, no, I'm serious. I want to be a musician, and this is how I'm going to do it. That would be a net positive for the world. And for kids in the West, particularly, who go through the education system as we know it in the West, I thought that would be a great outcome. Because I struggled with that, right? Like, I wasn't taken seriously when I said I wanted to do it. So that's a long-winded way of saying, I guess I wasn't able to say I was a musician because I felt like in the world that I was in, it wasn't really accepted as real. My first serious girlfriend, who I dated for like 4 years or something, we broke up because her family didn't think what I did was real, even though I was on the radio and touring and making money. And we cared about each other, but her family was like, this is not a real job. And it made it impossible to stay together. So I felt firsthand just how damaging that could be. And it's classism, and it's all sorts of things, but that doesn't really matter. My view is more like, okay, well, that we learn from the past, but what we do in the future is the gift we can give to the world. And so that was one of the original goals that I had.
That's super, super interesting. And yeah, I'm glad that you kind of touch on that, because I think in a lot of ways, being a musician, being in the limelight is glamorized, but I think that's also such a small fraction of the industry. But the reality for a lot of up and coming musicians is that it's really difficult and really hard to make a living and build those connections.
And the flip side of the limelight is also, and the part that's like not spoken about enough, is coming down from such highs as playing in front of lots of people and hearing people sing your songs to you and being on TV and doing radio interviews and things like that. The come down from that's really hard. And the come down from any career high in any industry is hard. Like, being an achiever means you have these incredible highs, but it also means that like you're going to have to learn how to manage equally the lows. And I think well-rounded and mentally healthy people typically clip both extremes, and so you sort of learn how to moderate the highs and moderate the lows. But when you are a musician and you're playing in front of like in the most extreme case in my career, 50,000, 60,000 people.
Wow.
It doesn't matter how disciplined you are mentally, you get a high that takes at least several hours to manage. And so what I'm really saying is when you come home and you go back home to a family or a partner, or just everyday life responsibilities, and there's not a lot of tools out there that teach you how to cope with that, you really better hope that you've got folks around you that can either learn those skills or are just supportive generally, because it's really yeah, there's a dark side to being an entertainer.
Definitely, definitely. And thank you so much for highlighting that. I think it is super important. So I always think it's really interesting when someone moves from, kind of creating music to kind of building a system around it, like you did, because I think it does say something deeper about how they see the role of music in people's lives as well. And obviously, you were kind of exposed to a lot of those holes. So, what made you kind of step back and think, I want to build this kind of infrastructure for music and not actually be part of that scene anymore?
So the most success I had in music was in Australia, which is where I started my band. But I did what a lot of Aussies do, and you have a little bit of success here. And I thought I'm going to go overseas and give it a crack in a larger market. And for me, that meant the UK, because that's where I was from originally. So I had a passport and all of that stuff. And I was like, this is going to be a no-brainer, and it's going to be really easy. And what you discount when you make that, I would say a mistake in some cases, is you forget that your hometown, or at least like your breaking the town where you first break in, you've typically spent years or decades building a network. Like even if it's like your neighbor's cousin's, farmer knows someone in a record label, like you've got this network of people that you can tap into. And that sort of, let's call it domain expertise, or built in, that sort of network that you spent years nurturing, has a value to it. Now, when you move to another city, particularly a large city that, whether it's like New York, London, Berlin, Sydney, any of these great music capitals of the world, you don't necessarily have that starting base. You certainly don't have decades of getting to know people and working out, who's who in the zoo and where the trendy spots are and where the right places to be are. And so you waste a lot of expensive time building that back up. And so I moved to London with some momentum in my career, and two things happened. The momentum stopped because I was starting from scratch, and that was terminal for the band, frankly. And the other thing that happened was I was burning through my savings, and thankfully I had some royalties that I was surviving on, but I burnt through savings and royalties to try and fast track decades of life experience in the space of a year. And it's a next to impossible job unless you've got the support of a label who's giving you some sort of advance or support, or having a wealthy family member helps, for many bands as well, to be honest. Like that's why
Yeah.
some acts that have, you often hear about wealthy parents and artists that make it as well. Unfortunately, like they do have a competitive advantage because you can afford to develop networks in new cities. So that was what inspired Vampr, because Vampr was like, LinkedIn sucks for music or anything creative. Like LinkedIn's great to find accountants and engineers and non-creative roles, but there's like, you can't really go on LinkedIn and say, find me a bass player who also likes Pink Floyd and lives within 10 miles. But I thought that there could be room for a product like that. And so what I wanted to do was like, I did sort of analysis. I spoke to a lot of people in the industry that I knew that were, at all stages of their careers, successful or just emerging, everything in between. And I sort of wanted to get a bit of a grasp on how many years do we think it actually takes to find those crucial relationships that allow you to create and make music. And the number we sort of came up with was like 6 or 7 years.
Wow.
And then what we took that a step further with Vampr, and we're like, okay, let's get that down to 6 or 7 minutes. And so like you sign up to the platform now, within a minute, you've got a profile. Within another minute, you've sent some connection requests. And like if you get someone who's accepts your connection requests and writes back to you like, can we take 6 years and make that happen in 6 minutes? So that was like the big ambition, the big bold idea. And then once I got that idea in my head, it was very hard to let go of it. I had to see it to its end. So I went and I started building.
It's so exciting. I love that. It's a amazing story. And I know you mentioned LinkedIn a little bit there, and I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on why doesn't something like LinkedIn kind of work for creatives, and the platforms, the social media platforms that are out there at the moment? What was that gap that you really saw?
Well, none of them were designed for the needs of a creative. So if you look at LinkedIn, it's like list based, right? Like there's a lot of scrolling, there's a lot of text information. It's sort of information dense. But when you think about what does a creative need, the number one most, well, in my opinion, but I think again I can speak with some authority, is really understanding someone's vibe, whether they're part of your tribe.
Mm.
Do they make you feel? What is their aesthetic? These are the intangibles that, like, for example, when we would look for bandmates in the early days, we used to put ads in rehearsal studios and on online forums, and people would turn up to rehearsals, and sometimes they'd be like a really great drummer, for example, but like they had the wrong look, or they just didn't look, they didn't fit in, or they weren't able to goof around, or they were just, maybe spiritually just on a different wavelength. These are the intangibles. And the way that as humans we sort of deal with intangibles is it happens on a subconscious level, but probably within seconds of chatting to me whether or not we'd get along or not, and vice versa. And that's like, sometimes early on some people would sort of say, oh, that's a very vain approach, but I completely disagree. It's kind of central to what makes art resonate between various groups, and why alternative people gravitate towards one sound and scene and look and aesthetic, and why punk gravitate towards another. And there's a very visual element to it, and there's an audio element too. Like fundamentally, someone might tick all the boxes look wise and personality wise, but then they might make a different sound that's just completely incompatible with what I'm trying to do. So what we realized was that all these existing platforms, two things. One, they weren't audio visual. They were text based and scroll based, number one. And number two, they weren't tailored to the needs of the specific requirements of a creative. And so it was just about creating software that could deliver those two things, sort of an audio visual experience tailored for the needs of someone in the music world. And so you just build accordingly, right? And we looked at dating apps and the binary nature of swiping, because dating apps, you're just like efficiently saying yes, no to things. The other thing about dating apps is they really made meat platforms mainstream. And we talk about meat platforms. Meat platforms, it's a word that we kind of gave to, but I've seen some people adopt it, is it's a subset of social networks. So if you think about Facebook, it's a friend platform. LinkedIn is a meat platform, I suppose, on a large sense. But meat platform is basically one where you're not interacting with someone you already know. You're interacting with someone you likely don't know. And so we looked at meat platforms and we looked at the most effective ones. And at the time, Swipe was the new thing, but Swipe had never been tested in a professional sense. It was only applied to shopping and dating. And so we, as far as we know, are the first company in the world to apply that, certainly at scale, to a professional network, and take a gamble that it would be an appealing search method for creative people. And look, there's critics, like there's always bad reviews of anything, but I would say on the whole, I mean, it's 10 years old, and it's as active as it's ever been. So I think it's worked. We're with AI, we're starting to look at new ways to update the discovery mechanism again, because the world doesn't keep evolving, and neither do we as humans. So, there's probably, it's time for a more significant, revamp, pardon the pun, but we're looking at that at the moment. And my thing has always been like, look around and take inspiration from other platforms. We don't need to be first to be the most effective, but we need to execute the cleanest, and it needs to make sense. And that's probably where my domain expertise as an artist plays the most important role. And it's a quality that I think when you first start a startup, you overestimate the value of your domain expertise. Then very quickly you underestimate it. So you overestimate it to begin with because you think you know more than you do. Then you underestimate it when you're like, oh, I'm in over my head and I have no idea what's going on. And then I think you come full circle and you go, if I didn't have domain expertise in the area I was in, I would have had to have spent millions of dollars hiring people who did. So
Yeah.
you go on this kind of weird little spiritual journey. Certainly I did, understanding what value do I really bring to this enterprise.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And I think you touched on so many kind of different interesting elements there. I think first off, just thinking about creative collaboration in particular, I think it's super unique and interesting because I think in that context, people aren't just exchanging skills, they're also kind of exchanging some kind of layer of vulnerability, I would say, as well, and kind of taste and emotion and all of that kind of ties into identity, like I said earlier. And I think it is so unique in that way. So I think it's amazing that you've kind of set up a safe space, really, where people can feel like they can express that.
Yeah, totally. And like, I think in the 10 years that it's been live, like you mentioned safe space, like there's really only been like maybe like we've been very fortunate, like maybe on less than one hand incidences where people have sort of abused that space. There's been scammers and stuff who sort of come in and try and phishing attempts to get money out of it. But we deal with them. That's like more of a cybersecurity threat. But like I'm talking about in terms of people who get laughed at for putting themselves out there or whatever, for expressing themselves musically and artistically. We were so, when I say we, I mean Barry Palmer, my co-founder on this project, we were so dogmatic about ensuring that it was a safe space, that like, because we know, and we're not super woke or anything like that, but we just know as artists that like even tough people who put up a tough front, when you put music out there and you really express yourself, especially in the form of song and singing and all that, there's just something extremely vulnerable about that. And even if something is so-called objectively not amazing, we wanted to algorithmically and like use ways to protect that person, and pair people who are at a similar skill levels, on number one, and then number two, just create a platform, even through the branding, that was safe and that didn't encourage folks to laugh. Like I go on in Facebook, you look at Facebook comments or you go on Reddit or whatever and you see how nasty some people can be on the internet. Fine, like there's a place for all that, and the internet can be pretty mean. We didn't want our platform to be that place, especially because we built a grassroots network. So we weren't like, we could have done this, but we didn't go down the path of like paying a Drake or a Kanye to brag about our product on day one and try and get people in that way. Like we wanted to build momentum by people coming across it because they needed it, and then telling others that this resource existed and that there was no need to be afraid of trying it. So that's been like an education piece, but it flows through to branding, it flows through to advertising and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's interesting.
I just want to quickly hop in here to say that if you're a musician, producer, songwriter, or creative, you can actually try out Vampr for yourself. Vampr is designed specifically for creatives in the music industry to connect, collaborate, and build meaningful creative relationships all over the world. So, whether you're looking for collaborators for your next project, trying to grow your network, or simply just want to connect with people who share your vision, it's definitely worth checking out. You can use my code SOUNDMIND to get $5 off an annual subscription, bringing it down to just $24.99 for the whole year. That's the code SOUNDMIND for $5 off, or you can follow the link in the description. Thanks so much to Vampr for supporting this episode, and thank you all so much for listening and supporting the podcast in general. It genuinely means so much to be able to have conversations and opportunities like this. But now, let's get back to the episode. Yeah, definitely. That's amazing. And of course, Vampr's not the only thing that you've kind of created. You know, you've got this whole ecosystem that really supports, like, I would say, you know, 3 different levels of the industry. You know, you've got kind of making music, you've got enjoying music, and monetizing music as well. And feels like a lot of what you've built is trying to solve for like the different layers of friction in the music experience as well.
So the reason we kind of evolved into a portfolio business of sorts that does own and operate lots of different music tech solutions. But the reason why that happened was it's kind of just in many ways, an unpacked exploration of the original idea, which is like great things happen when people connect, trying to build an ecosystem for the music industry. I mean, really what we're doing is just an extension of that. But it came from a fundamental understanding that if you don't have music creators, there is no ecosystem. If you don't have music consumers, there is no ecosystem. And if you don't have people who are helping commerce flow, that can be brands sometimes, that can be e-commerce platforms, it can be tools. There's all sorts of ways. But if you don't have the commerce piece, then you can't support the innovation that drives industry. Now, that all sounds quite technical, but suffice to say, if money is not exchanging hands, the folks who create the goods won't be able to continue to do the thing that the consumers are enjoying. And so I came to the conclusion that the only, like the way that we could add the most good into the world is, in this instance, create businesses that prop up all 3 of those core pillars. And that would ultimately give you a positive contribution to every essential part of the music creator flywheel. I think we've got a long way to go to comprehensively say that we are really good at all 3 of those, but we're getting pretty close. Like, we have our media business, which speaks to music fans. We have our e-commerce business that obviously also transacts with music fans. Then we've got tools like Vampr, which are for music creators. Serenade, which is a commerce B2B product, but it's actually a merchandise SKU, and it counts towards chart sales that major artists can take advantage of. So, and indie artists. So we create kind of tools across the spectrum. Some lean more towards the fan, some lean more towards the creator, and all of them help folks transact. That's what they all have in common.
Yeah, definitely. And you've also got vinyl.com as well, right? Like selling physical media. And that's really something that I think a few parts of your businesses really touch on. I think, you know, it's so fascinating that at the same time as technology has made music, I would say, more accessible than ever, people also seem to be craving, you know, more tangible and intentional experiences with music as well. You know, I love vinyl. I'm a huge collector as well. But why do you think that vinyl is coming back in such a digital world right now?
I think the answer might well be in the question on that one. I think people like to, as you said, I think people like to hold things, own things, physically touch. There is absolutely, I think, a movement to want to support artists in a more meaningful way than just streaming their single as well. And folks just inherently understand, I think, with physical formats that more money flows back to the artist. And again, they have a collectible that many folks put up on their walls. We always refer back to the interesting stat that like 51% of people who buy vinyl don't even own a player. So it's more about the artwork. It's more about supporting the artist, with their wallet. And I think it's more than just a trend. It's been like 20 years of growth or something now. It seems here to stay. And certainly, basically, I mean, CDs are harder, right? Because no one's manufacturing CD players anymore. There's just no need for it. And it's a digital format. So like vinyl is sort of the last great physical format. I think it probably endures in some way. And so to build a brand around that, and we obviously got a fantastic domain, and vinyl.com has been really thrilling. It's it's a fast growing part of the business, and I think we've always wanted to go deeper. And so we started to sell some other merchandise, and we're going to sell more and more products through there as our licensing capabilities increase and we do more stuff directly with artists. But I think over time we just want it to be a great place for collectors to go and buy stuff from their favorite artists.
Yeah, definitely. And I wanna touch on that a little bit because you mentioned, part of Vinyl Group is also Serenade, which finds ways for artists to kind of turn their music into collectibles, right? You're really building ways to, experience music beyond just streaming. And I want to kind of hear a little bit more about that because that was a part that I was really kind of fascinated by as well.
Yeah, so Serenade is like a bridge between a physical and digital experience. So, for example, like we've done a lot with lanyards. So let's say you go to your favorite artist is coming to town. They've got a tour coming up, and they might sell a lanyard either as a pre-sale or as part of the tour at the stands. And on the back of it will be a sort of a chip that's embedded into the lanyard. And when you tap your phone on that chip, it unlocks maybe the digital album, but also a bonus track or maybe a recording from another stop on the tour, or an exclusive video or message from the artist that isn't on social media. And again, like if it's an album that's sort of yet to be released, it also we're improved so that it can count towards first week chart sales and stuff as well. So it becomes this really interesting physical digital bridge because you get this physical memento. Like I just spoke about lanyards, but we sell like mini cassettes. We do anything. We sold like Barbie doll once. So it wasn't the brand Barbie, but it was like a doll that had a chip in it. And all that. So basically anything you can imagine, a tennis ball, anything physical. We did a Rolling Stone UK magazine. That you can put a chip inside and create these fun experiences that people can unlock in their digital life on their phone and then open it on their laptop, whatever they want to do. That's what Serenade's all about. And it's a really cool product. It's based out of England, that part of our business, and it's just going from strength to strength. It is an interesting bridge, as I say, between that physical and digital thing that we do.
It's super, super cool. I think overall, people don't just like to collect objects. I think for them, it represents something a lot deeper. It's meaning, and especially when that's linked to music, it goes really deep. So what's your kind of thoughts on collectibles in general? Do you think that they kind of deepen the emotional attachment to music that people have?
I think when you, it's not just collectibles for collectibles' sake. I think it means more when there's a scarcity involved as well. So when you know that your favorite artist has only signed 1,000 copies, or that the products, whatever the trinket is available for, a one run only. I think that scarcity is what gives it some additional meaning than just it being a collectible. I think there's obviously a movement towards that in all industries. Like, it goes well beyond. Look at trading cards. Like that. Like there's a huge element of sport. You know, fan base that cares about memorabilia and collectibles as well. I think it comes back to this idea of having something tangible that represents something you love, and knowing that there's not a lot of it in the world. There's something very special in that sort of combination of things. I think back to when I was a kid, I used to collect, Tarzos and things like that, and Pokemon cards, and people still do that now. So,
Yeah.
the music industry's never quite nailed that, but like kind of with physical formats in a way that it did. Like, so you could argue, I mean, vinyl's a collectible, right? It is.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think what keeps me endlessly curious is what do you unlock at that intersection between physical and digital, and Serenade does something in that intersection, but it's not the whole piece, right? I think there's something else there. NFTs weren't quite it, but something closer to that, that can come with you anywhere as a digital asset. I don't know that we'll be the ones to crack it, but I think there's something special there to unlock. So yeah, I think that we'll keep digging in that space and see if we can eventually find something that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's for sure a golden nugget in there somewhere. I think you're definitely
yeah,
on
just
the
don't know
right
what it is
track.
yet. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So as a kind of wider reflection, thinking about physical media versus, what we're living in today, which is streaming, we've kind of moved from owning music to accessing it, I guess. Do you think that something's been lost in the industry or, experience wise, psychologically, or what's your kind of thoughts on that change?
I think markets are clever. And in this case, we're talking about, the fan market. And we've also been talking about how vinyl sales are on the rise, and how, that's in many cases people trying to give back and fight back a little bit against that. So I think it's happening. Like, we could try and intellectualize it, and I'm sure many folks have, but that's just like an efficient market doing its thing. There's like, you go too far down, an impersonal route like streaming, which doesn't give much of an artist-fan relationship, and folks will find other ways to connect with their artists. Like, it can be social media, it could be vinyl, it could be live shows, it can be Serenade type products. So I think the market sort of takes care of that.
Yeah, definitely. And that actually kind of touches on the next thing that I wanted to chat about. We've spoken a lot about the connection to music itself, but I think increasingly people also form these incredibly strong emotional connections to artists as well themselves, right? And this is something that we kind of refer to as parasocial relationships, right? Which are pretty fascinating because, the brain can kind of interpret this kind of repeated exposure, almost like this genuine, like, social familiarity, even though the relationship is kind of one-sided in the case of like an artist and a fan, right? So do you think that we're more connected to artists now or more disconnected?
You know what? That's a really, really good question. I reckon the height, I could be well biased here, and I possibly am by age. I really think when I was like 10 to 15, that was the best time to be connected with artists, because like fan clubs were huge. Email had just started. I'm talking like late 90s, early 2000s. So you had really basic websites with fan communities that artists would speak to directly, and you could write letters and you would get a response from the artist. Now you can comment on someone's Instagram post or TikTok, and maybe Taylor Swift will like selectively occasionally press like on a comment, and it changes that person's day, month, year. Wow, she liked my comment. But like, that's the exception, not the rule. Whereas I do think there was a time when again, when forums were maybe more of a thing, and basic websites, sort of more Web 1 rather than Web 2, and now we're sort of in some version of Web 3. But I think there was a time when we were more connected, or at least it was more special. Like you could almost know the artist team. Now, I'm also aware that once you hit a certain age, you stop digging and you stop using technology to its extent. And yes, it's ironic I make these tools. I'm not the super fan using them anymore. So I'm sure that, and I know that there's Discord servers out there with super fans that still organize together and find ways to reach their artists. So I'm sure there's more ways now probably than ever to connect with your favorite artist, but I'm not sure that it's the most intimate that it's ever been, for better or worse. But that's just
Yeah.
that could just be an increasingly curmudgeon's view.
No, I think it's really interesting, and I think, you touched on something there. There's a lot of ways to connect, I guess, on the surface, but that's a separate thing, right? But what do you think makes fans feel genuinely seen, like in today's era, rather than just kind of, I guess, surface level connecting?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think some artists have a real gift for connecting with fans through live shows, and they, really talented artists can make a really large venue feel quite small, and really interact with the crowd and make everyone feel like they're performing to them. So some artists just have that, right? It's just a quality. But as far as sort of other activities beyond the stage goes and how they utilize social media and all of that, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a new issue for sure, and I think even with the rise of AI and these kind of new technologies, I've seen these accounts that kind of replicate interaction with whatever celebrity that might be, and it's quite a scary reality to live in, I think.
And I've seen recently auto pens being used to sign merchandise and devalue the concept of that, which I spoke to someone in the sort of collectors community that takes signed memorabilia very seriously, and they're apoplectic, like furious, because it really takes the piss out of as we were talking about before, the scarcity of having something signed by a person that you really love on a product that you care deeply about.
Yeah.
They do it with an auto pen. Like, what's the value of that? And so we're in a brave new world, as you say, between AI and automation more broadly. I mean, I'm positive, like you said, that there'll be teams out there who train up agents that speak in the voice of artists to interact with fans, not
Yeah.
necessarily not necessarily through audio, although possibly, but certainly through writing and all that. And it does raise ethical dilemmas. I mean, what happens when a fan confesses something that they shouldn't, to that person, or and it's a bot that's talking to. I mean, so there's just all these sorts of. We are in a brave new world at the moment, and I expect that there'll be lots of these edge cases that we'll all be talking about over the coming years. Yeah, interesting times. There's never a dull moment. That's the thing with music and technology. They've grown together hand in hand. They're inseparable, and at times they're best friends, and at times they're at great odds with each other. But they are interwoven and forever will be interlinked. As yeah, to almost two parts of the same coin. Technology is the format through which we listen to music, and it's the format that we connect through fans. So it's a very interesting dynamic.
Definitely. I think that connection will always there. There'll always be kind of discussion to be had on that front. And what you touched on there regarding, the merchandise and the kind of value of, signage in that case, I think that really highlights something. It's really interesting that emotional connection is also what drives kind of monetary value in music as well, whether that is like streaming, merch, collectibles, or like fandom in general. And I'm curious, with your experience with like monetization on a lot of different levels, do you think that monetization can ever conflict with authenticity in music?
Well, yeah, that's a broad question. I mean, on a macro level, if someone gets into music to make money, the motivation is wrong. It's maybe I wouldn't go so far to say it's objectively wrong, but I mean, because there are people that do. I did it for a few years where I was like, I need to make some money from music, so I did production music. And there are people who play in wedding bands because they want to earn money from doing the thing they love. So like, it's not objectively wrong to get into music to make money, but certainly as an I will say this, as an original artist, it's unlikely that the motivator is or should be to make cash. A lot of people will say, I want to be able to make a living from doing the thing I love, but that's not motivating them to do that. If they were motivated just by money, they'd go and work at a reliable job that had a steady income. So I think on a macro level, like, there's a bit of a disconnect between that. But on a more, I think more to the level you're possibly asking about is like, yes, I think if you're trying to monetize a TikTok page or like even a Facebook, creator account, for example, and you know that you've got to pump out X number of videos per day, of which at least one needs to go sort of semi-viral, or at least, clock over 10,000 plus hits so that you can make enough to cover overheads, which is not an extreme example. I'm aware of bands in that position. That is a conflict with creativity, because I would imagine, having spoken to people in that boat, they would much prefer to just be in the studio doing the thing they actually love. That's an interesting problem that's very specific to what's happening today. It's a problem that didn't exist 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Yeah, and that just kind of, whilst you were speaking there, I was kind of reflecting on, you've built all of these different platforms that do target those different parts of the industry. And, you mentioned there that money shouldn't be the sole motivator. But of course, for some people, they do look at it as their job. And, of course, we live in this world where we need to make money. And of course, that is like a motivator on the side, at least. But when you're kind of building platforms in the music space that are, for creators, I guess, do you think there's a responsibility then beyond simply helping artists earn? Is there also a responsibility to support creativity in different ways as well, beyond the kind of monetization aspect of things?
Yeah, and that I'd go back to Vampr. Like, the first thing I built is just about helping enable creativity. So it's all about finding people to work with, and then how you work together, what you do together is your business. We've since added some features to help you sell your services and help transact a little bit, but the core product is fundamentally about getting creativity going. It's very hard to monetize, by the way. It's a complicated space because there's an element of it, I don't want to sound too wanky, that is slightly philanthropic, because you are just facilitating folks meeting one another. Then it's up to us as a business to monetize that, not at the you try not to make it at the expense of the artist, because two reasons. Number one, artists don't have a huge amount of disposable income. And number two, in order for the flywheel to keep turning, they need to trust that they're not the product. So there's an interesting tension there that is harder on a creative network than it is if you're just, I imagine, running a more straightforward social network.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for the artists themselves, there's kind of this tension between like the intrinsic motivation of like, I'm doing this because I love it, versus the kind of extrinsic aspect of, attention, monetization, and all of those different aspects. But of course, creativity is like the baseline for that. But what do you think success then means for an artist today, financially versus emotionally?
I think financially, it's probably always been a version of, I'd like to be able to work in this industry doing this thing that I love without having to worry about maybe getting a second job or a third job or a fourth job to just pay basic bills. It's such an interesting thing. A lot of artists, best work are from those early days when they are having to struggle a bit. And it's a really interesting concept to explore when folks get that sort of comfort, maybe they've had a bit of success. Often the music becomes a little bit happier, and that's not a bad thing. The world needs happy music, but it isn't. There's such an interesting, as this is just an observation, I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but there's an interesting observation between the sort of the dynamic or the relationship between folks, where they're at financially, and the music they create. I think, like, I'm thinking of modern artists like Sam Fender's is probably a good example. Like, you really always hear the progression and the change in sound, and then, like, with bands, like, you can hear it with U2's music and Coldplay's music. As people get bigger, they do sort of tend to, that sound changes. But I think, look, on a personal level, artists just want security. So I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting that. That certainly was my biggest driver to be quote unquote successful. Was I wanted to stay in this industry that I loved, but not constantly be stressed about money. And it's taken a long time to get there. And we fight to stay there. Like, running a business isn't simple, and we literally, we're privileged to do what we do, and we go to work every day. Like, we understand, like, the gravity of getting this right. It's really important, not just for ourselves, but for all other artists. So we take that very seriously. Yeah. Yeah. It is freedom. I don't. Yeah, it's a beautiful word. It's a beautiful thing to pursue. Um, and I think, I don't know if you ever fully get there either, but because you're always answering to someone. It doesn't matter how much money you have, or there's always someone. There's always a bigger fish. There's always a boss, and even like, I'm the CEO of this thing, but I still answer to a board, and the board still answers to shareholders, and the shareholders all answer to the government by way of being taxpayers. So we all answer to someone, and then we all answer ultimately to a higher power that decides our fate. So there's always another boss. But I do think feeling like you can paint freely is a really beautiful way to be able to live your life, and it's a choice, but you have to fight and be prepared to work extremely hard to defend it.
Now, I want to finish with a topic that I think is top of all of our minds in the music industry at the moment. We've touched on it a little bit, but it feels like we're entering a period now where technology isn't just changing how music is distributed, but also how it's experienced emotionally. We've touched on AI and different things like that, but I'm curious about your perspectives. What do you think music will feel like in 10 years? And I know that's like a huge question, because it's hard to kind of predict what things are looking like within the next few months these days. And especially, I work in tech in my day-to-day, and things are changing so quickly. So I
Sure.
wonder what your perspective is on that.
Obviously, like, genre and sounds have changed. You can hear it. You listen to decade by decade, and every decade has a sort of a sound. And you can go back as far as the phonograph to hear that progression. But the one thing I think every decade has in common is music makes you feel. So, you ask, how will music feel in 10 years? Well, I have no idea if it'll be partially AI generated, almost certainly, because I think that's just a tool, and I don't think it's actually as big a deal as perhaps some make it out to be. But I think it's kind of irrelevant how it's made. I suspect that whatever it sounds like, it will make you feel, because the day it stops making you feel, people won't consume it. I mean, music is this beautiful universal language that has a way of crossing borders and ideologies and all sorts of views and hot takes. It's just something that either resonates with you or it doesn't, and it is subjective. Some people like some genres and some sounds, and other people like other wavelengths and all sorts of things. But the reason why anyone sits down and listens to music or goes to a show to watch and experience music is because it makes them feel happy, melancholic, reflective, amped, all these different amazing emotions that music can and does, evoke in all of us. So whatever it sounds like in 10 years, it will still make us feel.
That's such an amazing way of putting it. I love that. And I just have to pick up on something you said there. You mentioned about AI and you said it's just a tool and maybe
Yeah.
it's not a big of a deal as people
Yeah.
are making it out to be. Tell me more on that.
I think like anything new that comes along, right, like rightfully so, there's an argument about how to do it ethically and how to make sure people are compensated. Particularly, I feel strongly that folks who are involved in the music that's being used to train should get some compensation, and probably on the way in, not on the output. I'm getting a little bit technical, but I don't think the output's easy to calculate or all that much use. In the same way, like when I go into a recording studio and write a song, I am bringing with me everything I've ever heard, and the way I paid the artists that I'm inspired by is by streaming their music, buying their music, going to a concert, and then I'm the product of all of my inspiration, and then I write something new. AI is just the product of its inputs, and the problem right now is that no one's getting paid on the way in. So I think a lot of the debates about how to get people paid on the way out, I actually think that the debate's misguided. I think it should be more about the front side, but that's just my perspective. And I think ultimately once that's resolved, and it will be resolved because it's being talked about everywhere, it's like top of mind for countries and collection societies and all sorts of things. So it'll get resolved. And once it gets resolved, it'll just be another tool like MIDI. And it won't be that remarkable. And I really don't, my gut says in 10 years, people won't go, has it got AI in it? I think the good music will win. And it might have an AI kick drum, or it might have an AI bass line, but 90% of it's probably human, because to be human is to be imperfect. And that's what makes something resonate. And so I just don't think it'll be a topic that we're talking about in 10 years. In the same way that when the internet came along, everyone, do you have a website? Do you have a .com? But then, now I don't remember the last time someone says, do you have a website? Of course I have a website. It's just a part of the toolkit. That's where I think AI goes. But that's just my perspective.
Yeah, it's super, super fascinating. And, I've spoken about this with, the couple of guests I've had on the podcast so far and reflected on it myself too. And, there's a lot of studies out there at the moment that show that, people listen to AI generated music and they actually quite enjoy it, or wouldn't be able to maybe even tell the difference until they've been told that it's AI generated. And then they're like, oh no, I hate this. Horrible. Turn it off.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think, again, there's an emotional, or there's a ideological part of the debate at the moment that probably needs to weed itself, or we just, as a society, collective, we need to get to the end of that conversation. And then I think it probably peters out a little bit. I don't personally give a crap when I'm consuming any media, how it gets to me, as long as it's making me feel. That's why we consume. To feel is to connect with yourself, with an emotion, with another person who might be consuming alongside you or with you or through you. So that is the purpose of art, is to help us all connect. And we like, and the value of our business is that connection sits at the heart of everything that humans do that's great. And so I think ultimately, if a machine plays a small role in that, I don't care.
Yeah, super interesting perspective. Thank you so much for sharing that. Of course, like, the ethics debate can go on forever, and I think that's something, like you said, that we're still figuring it out, right? And that
Yeah.
will be something to follow.
Yeah, there's all sorts of other things like, water consumption involved in running power centers and bits and bobs like that are like, interesting debates and shouldn't be poo-pooed or discounted, but they are debates, which means that they will sort themselves out, and nothing I can say on this podcast or you can say will accelerate that. It's just then they're national conversations happening around the world. Things will get more affordable over time. They'll get more efficient. They'll get more economical. They'll get less damaging, and we'll move on to the next problem of our times. That's yeah,
Yeah, it's just the way things work, I
that's
guess.
right.
It's a cycle. It's a
Yeah.
cycle. And you mentioned there as well, in feeling music so deeply, I think what comes with that is also feeling the imperfections of it, feeling the raw emotion that comes in music. And, one thing I always think about is, okay, that's a reason why we love human made music today, because that's such a part of it. But what happens when, AI is also able to replicate those little imperfections as well? Like, comes back to the research.
I'll say this for probably 20 years, a common production technique has been to add the sound of vinyl crackle onto record to give it that tape effect.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's faking tape. Does that offend you as the listener? No, it doesn't.
That's super interesting.
So I don't know. I just thought of that, but like that's
Yeah.
a lot of artists will either run a very small hiss track underneath, or they'll run a recording through an actual tape machine, which is not dissimilar to directors running a movie shot in digital through film at the end to give it some grain.
Yeah.
We don't care about that, so you know,
That's so true. That's really fascinating. And I think that's a whole other debate as well. That's put there to evoke nostalgia, which in turn, evokes a lot of other things, comes back to monetization that we were talking about. I think it's yeah, really interesting loop
yeah.
actually. I never thought about that. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Josh. This was amazing. I just want to kind of tie up our conversation today. I always love kind of ending these conversations by kind of zooming out from the industry side and really diving back into the kind of personal side of things, because, beneath all of this technology and the platforms that we've got, music is something human at its core. And I think that's, the main thing that we kind of advocate for over here on the Sound Mind. And having you on today is really kind of tied into that as well. You've experienced music from so many different perspectives. So just to kind of close off, I'd love to ask you, what does music mean to you now compared to when you started?
Um, music has given me everything in my life, and everything I could. Well, it's given me everything that I have, and it's given me just about everything I could want. So it's a very it's just it's important as ever, um, because I look around my room and I look at things on the wall and accomplishments, and I look at my family, and I look at the cities I've lived in and the people in my life and all of that stuff, and it's all come to me through working in music. And it's given me challenges too, and it's taken a toll on my health and blah blah. So there's all sorts of, like, it's not all positive, but but challenges are gifts too, in a funny way, and especially ones that you get through, which is every challenge that doesn't kill you, right? So, like, as I say, everything that I've ever had is has come from working in and loving music, and I've achieved pretty much everything I wanted to achieve as well. So, um, I I owe my life to it. I still, when I hear a new artist, I mentioned Sam Fender before. He's not new anymore, but um, I mean, at the moment, when I come across any new artist, I'm just trying to think of who I'm listening to at the moment, but I still get a buzz when I hear something that's truly incredible and brand new, and there's something really cool about that. And that definitely slows down as you get older. Like there's a point where you stop actively seeking out new music, and so I think in some ways it becomes even more special when you stumble on something that you're like, this is truly right up my alley and awesome and makes me really feel. So that, you know, that I just get excited because I know that the best part of music is every single year someone turns 10 and picks up their first instrument, and that kicks the whole cycle off again. So one thing we used to have investors ask us, how do you know you'll still have people who want to use your platform in 10 years? Like every single year, there's a new cohort of people who discover music for the first time. And as long as humans are having babies, there's going to be new musicians and new artists. And so, like that excites me because I know that there's always going to be innovation. And so there's always going to be something new to look forward to. I don't over intellectualize it as much as I probably make it sound, to be honest. I don't sit there and think about these things. I'm reflecting on them because you're asking me questions today, but it's just one of the joys of working in music is you come across new things all the time. I sit in bed some mornings. I think it must annoy the shit out of my wife, but I'll just I'll go through emails, or someone might have sent me something on WhatsApp or Instagram, whatever, and as I'm sort of trying to clear notifications before I get into my work day, it does strike me quite often that usually before I've even gotten out of bed, I've already consumed multiple pieces of music and oftentimes new music. And I think that's just, again, something we just take for granted, but it's actually really, really special when you stop and think about how amazing that is. To start your day hearing someone else's creativity that's brand new, that can sometimes be really bad, but sometimes be really good, and has the ability to change your mood. Like it's just so cool that technology allows that to happen from the convenience of bed.
Yeah, it's amazing. It comes back to the whole accessibility thing. I think it's amazing that we have access at our fingertips to so much amazing music. And yeah, music is one of those industries that's always going to be evolving. So super exciting to be part of it.
Totally.
Yeah, Josh, tell us, where can people find you and follow all the amazing stuff that you're doing?
All right. Well, our website is vinyl.group, and that's sort of like a landing page that just shows you all of the companies that sit underneath that parent co. But that's a good place to anyone, fan or creator, to get started and check out all of the wonderful things that we do, and get consumed in the world of vinyl.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Josh, thank you so much. It's been so great to have you on the SOUNDMIND today. Amazing conversation. So much to
Thank
dig
you
into.
so much. No, much appreciated. Thank you for having me.
Such a great episode. And remember, you can get on Vampr, the platform for music creatives, with the code SOUNDMIND for $5 off an annual subscription. And the link is in the description below as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate or review on wherever you're listening and share it with someone who loves music just as much as you do. Don't forget to follow us and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Also, come and say hi over on Instagram and on Threads at the SOUNDMIND Talks. Absolutely love having such great chats with you all over there. And if you've got any ideas for future guests on the podcast, don't forget to send them over to me. But until then, keep listening, keep reflecting, and I'll see you on the SOUNDMIND.